The ecosystem and the brand that Meta built around Llama was bringing the smaller players and smaller startup around.
I think when an open source model, especially like Llama 2, gets a lot of downloads and stuff like that, there's a community of developers built around it.
In the future, are we going to see more openness, or are we going to see more proprietary technologies in this space?
Open source is not going anywhere, and I think that is always has been the Silicon Valley's nature. We will always have proprietary models with like little bit finish and all.
But there is still anxiety about Chinese models.
It's been a pretty evident problem so far. Like when you have open benchmarking data sets, most of the people just take these benchmarks as a grain of salt.
Thank you so much, Prateek and Aditya, for making time for us today. The question that we're trying to answer in this episode is, how does open source artificial intelligence foster both innovation and inclusion? So I thought I would begin by asking both of you to give me an example, the best example that you have in mind when it comes to open source AI and innovation. Aditya, could we start with you?
Sure. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invite as well. I think the most impactful open source model out there, or in project out there, for me especially, was Llama 2. That basically got me into deep learning as a whole, right? When Llama 2 came out, it was a pretty small model, 7 billion parameter, which you can use. And there was a lot of ecosystem around it as well. Like there was scripts for fine-tuning it, understanding the model architecture and stuff. So as a developer point of view, I feel like Llama 2 was a very revolutionary step in the open source journey, especially in mine. And it's been, the Llama models have been very impactful in the developer ecosystem as well.
Prateek, could we hear from you now? What would you say is the best example of open source innovation that you've encountered?
I've been in this field for longer. So in terms of language model, open source, the BERT would be like one of the pioneering model. That's how most of the folks right now who are working with neural networks got introduced to the AI world, generative AI. But in terms of impact, definitely Llama 2 is the one we used with the collaboration with Servam to train the Dhenu model, and which was like something very first of experiment to train vertical specific a model, because until that point folks were trying to fine tune models for style, and we thought how about if we try to ingest some more knowledge to the existing one, because we've been working on a lot of data curation for a while. With Indian agriculture, which is obscure data you will not find on internet, and we were able to successfully add a lot of stuff. And yes, it's there are pros and cons and things, but Llama 2 was one of the model that actually started this whole revolution of open source language models, because I'm assuming we're talking about a language models open source, not general open source AI, because the AI can be you can trace back AI to pretty 90s and all. So in terms of generative AI, I think the BERT would be the beginning, and I think Llama 2 was most impactful one.
Thank you so much, Prateek. So perhaps we should now go to the inclusion side of the open source benefits. So Aditya, you spoke about the community around a particular open source project.
Yep.
So, could you expand on that and tell us how more people can get involved, especially in an open source project?
Yep. So I think when an open source model, especially like Llama 2, gets a lot of downloads and stuff like that, there's a community of developers built around it, right? It's not only just the model, but you get frameworks that enable you to inference on these models. And if I remember correctly, inferencing was hard, and VLLM and something like SGLang came along. And the first few models they integrated were the Llama models as well. And inferencing became easier. Then fine-tuning came along, Hugging Face integrated it. There were other libraries like Llama Factory that also integrated Llama 2. Basically, it enabled anybody to fine tune with enough GPU and data. And this was also the first case scenario where I saw like synthetic data being used, especially while fine tuning these models or using this model to generate more synthetic data. So, something like Llama 2, Llama 3 as well. Just the community around it, just the support enables anyone who is at the beginner level as well to get started with it. So I think in that point of view, inclusion does happen significantly.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Prateek, you were talking of a particularly hard domain, agriculture, and perhaps you are personally invested in this, given that you come from such a family. So could you now reflect about the inclusion dimension, especially from the agricultural domain?
Yeah, like I try to be short because the story can actually end up winding out to be like a long one. So in inclusiveness, like we're talking about two things. First of all, it's kind of giving like level playing field for everyone. So in agriculture, it is a space where like it's not lucrative as like a coding or like a medicine, where like from the investors to the cloud provider find like a really quick gains. It's like a slow moving, but there are like billions of people associated with this industry, right? So what ended up happening with the open source AI is that like folks like us get level playing field because the models are there available on Hugging Face. Anybody can download. You do not need with the smaller models that like Llama 2 introduced, the 7 billion and then 8 billion one. Like we can use like the couple of RTX GPUs at home, and we don't have to kind of go outside and ask for help. And that kind of like open up this opportunity for anyone to kind of work on like model fine tuning, like or like inference, like what Aditya has been talking about, and many other things. But with the open models, you're like you have independence, you have like all the freedom to do whatever you want to do. And that's one of the level playing field inclusiveness that I feel the open source AI kind of bring in. And in terms of the domain like agriculture, like we have been training the new model. We were like the first one to train, and until now, there are only a couple of other folks try, and those are like the largest corporations, like Fortune 500 company. So still, like not many folks are trying because agriculture is like further away from all the other AI advancement we see. But because of open source nature, like folks like us can also kind of access this weight, train it, and kind of keep continue like building without like looking for like a huge amount of fun. Because if we want to do work on like a continual pre-training or like building foundation model, will require a lot of fun, which for agriculture will be like very difficult to get. So yeah, so it gives level playing field, and also for domain like agriculture, it's kind of provide opportunity for startup like us who are like kind of like trying to stand up on build their own ground, like bootstrap, and like generating revenue while not having all the buzzes around us.
Thank you so much, Prateek. And I want to come back to you, Aditya. Previously, when it came to information technology, there was a divide between the scientists and the engineers. More and more, at least as far as AI and open source AI is concerned, entrepreneurs such as yourself are publishing academic papers. So, as a researcher, what would you say is the biggest reason for having foundational models openly available?
Yeah, so I was purely a dev person 1.5 years ago. So I was like mainly into full stack, backend, and stuff. And eventually, models such as Llama 2 come out, and I was like, okay, this model is really good. There's an ecosystem that supports it. I can easily understand Pythonic code, right? And so because of this, I think it pushed me towards also doing research. Research was the not the first thing that came to mind, but it was more like, okay, let me try experimenting these models. These are at the bare bones level where it's in the model layer. I can actually tweak the weights of it. I can also do it on a sizable GPU, like an 800 GPU is enough to fine tune using LoRa and stuff, right? And because of this, it pushed me for the initial thing. I understood how Llama models work, what is the architecture and stuff. Then later saw that these models can be adapted for different languages, different modalities. And that's where the curiosity started driving me, where I was like, okay, we can do some research in the space. At least try to build some models that are very specific to certain use cases, either be multilingual or make it multimodal. So in that point of view, just having these models in the open source space, able to play with them without having any restrictions, did help a lot in the whole research journey of mine.
Prateek, unlike Aditya, you come from the world of research. You have left your academic colleagues behind, and now you are an entrepreneur. So, if you were to talk to them, what would you say is the reason to choose an open model over a proprietary model?
So I left probably academia because I didn't like publishing papers. So my thing is like, at one point I figured out the paper publishing game is like, there's not like much impact you can leave by just publishing papers. If your work is actually not impactful or it's not going to be used by folks, then it's just waste of time. Like there are like thousands of paper getting published like every year in every conferences now. And like most of them were not even get read. Nowadays LLM is going to start reading. So I think like from my perspective, like what I have seen from all this, the problem that I have selected is something that is actually kind of impacting, and this agriculture being like very personal issue, like I have spent like enough time in the years behind this solving the problem. We're solving the problem for like different angle, but the open source for all along have helped us a lot because as a bootstrap startup, someone funding from their own savings without open source ecosystem, like not just like the generative AI come like in pretty recently, but even before that, like many other tools like for model training, the PyTorch of the world, TensorFlows and all other things, right? Those were also very important in terms of like standing up like researcher like us who has been coming from the research academia background, but then want to go and use those like tools to build something that can be used by like the real folks in the real world. So like yeah, the journey has been like difficult. It's not like always like in a rosy because it's not like it's a difficult domain to work with. But now we are at the stage where we have seen the fruits. Like right now we are probably the leader in the whole world in terms of agriculture generative AI, and working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies in India, in US. Now in US we have been kind of invited by many other folks to be part of their benchmarking consortium or like a train and build them out. So it's working out and we are seeing real impact all around the world. And hopefully like when the things picks up, we will be at the stage where we can actually start serving like much more people than we are doing right now. But yeah, the open source has been always there to help out for the startup like us, and like anyone transitioning from academia, there are enough tools. But yeah, I'm not in the paper publishing game. Basically, I have left that one for a long time back.
Thank you so much, Prateek. Aditya, Prateek was talking about benchmarks, and that is something that everybody talks about, whether they are proprietary or open source. But when exactly, Aditya, can we trust a model? When is there sufficient transparency within a model or AI deployment? On the one hand, we say open source models are good, but there is still anxiety about Chinese models like Quen and DeepSeek. So could you help our viewers understand when exactly can open source be trusted?
Okay, that's a tricky question. I think as everything is open and most of these benchmarks, the data set itself is open. And I mean, it's been a pretty evident problem so far. Like when you have open benchmarking data sets, people just train on it. And at the end of the day, you can't really trust if a benchmark actually holds true, if the data set has been corrupted with the benchmark or not, right? But what I have been seeing is, especially LMs, as they become smarter, benchmarking ability of them, like with current, like having static data sets or having stuff like that, doesn't really span out. So you especially the old paradigm of where you have like the LMs, where you have the leaderboard sort of thing with a static benchmark, static data set. I'm not really seeing that scaling out, and I've talked to other researchers in the space as well. Benchmarking in that manner to actually like tell, oh, this model is better than this kind of. I mean, it doesn't prove anything at this point. Most of the people just take these benchmarks as a grain of salt in this thing. But there are other benchmarks such as the LMSIS arena where it's actually humans rating each model. There's ELO ranking based, and I think that's one of the best ways so far, at least from what I've seen, to actually rank these models in terms of human preference. If this is, I mean, everything is ranked, right? You compare two different LLMs and rank which is better, and yeah, I think that has been one of the go-to methods for evaluating these open source models, see if they're trusted as well. And as most of the things in open source models like are open, so you can also figure out how you can jailbreak them or like break the thing, and you can also track back and say, oh, if we had done this in either the RL stage or in the fine-tuning stage, we could avoid some outputs as well. And I think Llama models are especially prone to jailbreaking, sorry, especially not prone to jailbreaking, and they have done a lot of stuff in order to not produce answers that are problematic in the sense.
Thanks so much, Aditya. Prateek, if I can now come to you, we have discussed open source versus proprietary AI, especially Gen AI models, for some time. From where you're sitting, and you're in the US, where is the history headed? In the future, are we going to see more openness, or are we going to see more proprietary technologies in this space?
I don't see open source going anywhere. Like, I think just today I saw someone actually releasing, like, my biggest concern with this model weights, like, these are not open source, they are like open weight models, right? So like source code, we do not have it. And then my biggest concern is like the models that are being released as like CC by NC, like Creative Commons but non-compete one, right? I really do not like to work with those models. I want, if you're releasing open weights, I want the model weight to be permissive enough so I can do whatever I want, and also kind of repackage it and create a startup on top of it. Because ultimately the objective for open weight models with like a permissive license would be that, like, it can foster an ecosystem of a new startup, like, the new, like, folks like us and other folks can actually build something on top of it, right? So if the trend is going to be in the direction where everybody start releasing by CC by NC, then I think that's going to be like a troublesome. Meanwhile, the Chinese models are actually very well permissive. So I have recently started liking those labs who are like literally not going like, a lot behind all the strategy and building their moats and not giving access to their models. Instead, they're like being more open. And Llama, like Meta, has been always there, right? So they've been continuously improving. The Llama 4, I think I'm still waiting for the smaller ones. I was at the Llama Con, and I think when Mark was asking question to the Databricks CEO, he was also like coming up with the same opinion. They're like, hey, the ecosystem and the brand that Meta built around Llama was bringing the smaller players and smaller startup around. So he said, like, yeah, it is in the making, and they'll probably prioritize it to release earlier than expected, maybe.
Okay. Aditya, I want to come back to you. And smaller model means that we can run these models on a mobile phone, we can run the model on a laptop. But what is your analysis of locally hosted models? When is it important for us to host models locally, and when is it perhaps unimportant?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of smaller models, and I'm kind of waiting for the Llama 4 smaller models, both in terms of like inferencing it on local machines and even like training them becomes much easier. And yeah, hosting models locally plays a really important part, especially when you're doing deals with enterprises and stuff. Most of the time, you wanted to host it on their infrastructure. Um, then there's the other thing as well, personal AI, where you have the model on your laptop or on your phone. And I think with the models being released nowadays, less than a billion or less than 2 billion parameter models, and with the appropriate infrastructure, such as I think Apple is doing a really good job with MLX. You can run most of these models locally. They have good inference speeds as well. Like tokens per second is also really good. And some of the use cases we have seen as local document processing, where documents have been understood locally, chat with across your laptop or like chat across your mobile, this thing. These are some use cases where locally hosted models where you need that actual privacy and security comes really in handy. And I think, yeah, small models with very specific task-oriented goals do perform really well. You cannot have a generalized model that does well. You can have an ensemble of small models for small tasks that are doing well. And I've seen that kind of plays out really well in the local space.
Thanks, Aditya. Prateek, I want to come back to you with a variation of that very same question. You have moved away from citation counts, and now, like many of India's digital public infrastructure, your goal is to have societal scale intervention in India as far as agriculture is concerned. So, when India as a state is building the agricultural stack and AI around the agricultural stack, and surely you would be part of that ecosystem. Why does on-prem hosting of the model, why is that important, or on-device hosting of the model, why is that an important consideration?
So we are actually helping out with the DPI and different agriculture initiatives that are going on. We are part of there from India AI to AI course and all, and like continuously open sourcing our model. Now we are talking about like a two different hosting, right? A hosting on premise, which is on the GPU on like on premise infrastructure of either Megraj or some other like a DPI stuff. And the second one is hosting on a phone or like embedded device, right? So we have seen that 8 billion parameter, 8 to 24 billion parameter models are good enough to be hosted on-premise A100 or Megraj or other different clusters that are being built. And it just gives us, like, as Aditya was saying, the domain specific nuances that you can actually embed, right? When you are actually creating a conversational model for farmer, like I'll give you an example, like, in many places in India, and when you are actually talking or asking question, even like verbally, like when you're talking about corn kernel, and they're like just a kernel like this, and there are like different words that being used in different part in different dialect for aphids and like white fly and all that agriculture context and nuances, you can actually fine tune it when you are actually building the model, and that model actually understand that they think very well compared to a general purpose model which is not like trained to do that thing. Now hosting and owning that actually give us much more control on like how we want to build. Like if you're building for smallholder farmer, we can fine tune according to that. If you're building for B2B enterprise application in agriculture, we can tune it for that. And then there's a problem, there's a issue of this very small model, like a 1 billion parameter or lower, like SLM, very small one. So we actually did port on an Android phone. The goal with the on-device RAG, STT, TTS, like whole thing can the KissanAI assistant can work entirely on the Android phone without going to the internet. And the thing is, like, we still have many places where the internet access is not available or available, but they are like very limited. So they're like, folks are saving their like bandwidth for other stuff. And there are like embedded devices like in the field that we probably require like a local inferences. So for those applications, like this SLMs are very useful. And this SLM can be very much like a very task specific. Like, hey, you are like a, we have Krishi Vigyan Kendra, right? So we do not need to have like a extension worker going to the village to help out farmer by talking, but you can have like a small device always available there, and whatever knowledge that like the extension worker has, you can embed that over there, and that question answer farmer can ask to the device, it will reply it back. So those kind of devices that which we really want to work on, and that can be kind of later on extended with adding weather information, market information. So anyone walking by in a village can just talk to it, it will reply back, and you just move on. And those kind of things basically kind of I see very useful. You don't have to have phone and things like that, like like a community thing. People can share their ideas, and then we can actually capture those what's going on in the like different pest, and someone find a pest inside their village, like in a farm, and say like, hey, we found this a white fly in this cotton crop, be aware, something like that. And then we can use that context back again for someone else is asking, or use a notification or broadcasting. So those kind of application that we are like a kind of thinking, working on going forward with SLMs.
Thank you so much, Prateek. Aditya, my last question to you is on this question of bias. As Prateek was saying, if a question is asked about an Indian farmer growing corn, he does not want to have answers from the US, from a US corn farmer. So could you give us an example of how open source can be used to fix bias in models or services.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, every model, when it's trained, it kind of reflects the data it's being trained on. And data in the Indic context or in the Eastern context is kind of limited at large scale when you compare to English and Western context, right? So these models are generally tend to be biased. I think nowadays measures have been taken to include more data from everywhere. But just holding few models that are kind of biased with open source ecosystem, if you have data that's pertaining to your use case and let's say farming or let's say something in the cultural context of your country, right? You can just feed in that data and get this model to be much more accustomed to your training data as well. So even though the initial model is biased, you can at the end of the day train it, fine tune it. There's also like really good strategies nowadays with fine tuning or like editing the models, where you can actually make the models answer in a very predictable format. So you can also mitigate bias in that context. So I mean, from a use case point of view, when you're fine tuning models, there are pretty much a lot of research that's been going on and a lot of techniques that help you eliminate bias in the context you are looking for.
Thank you, Aditya. Prateek, is bias really a solvable problem? After all, just on corn farming, perhaps it's different in each state of India. Perhaps it's different within a state as well. So is bias a problem that we can solve, or whether it's open source or proprietary, or is it perhaps something that we will always be struggling against?
So what we are trying to do when we create like the training data, we try to embed and annotate the data with like a location centric information. Like, okay, this is coming from the Kerala, from the coconut for this particular thing. But see, the overall the learning process that we know from the like neural network and all, when you actually throw a lot of data, the model will learn about like, the Kerala and the coconut varieties that are being like suggested for that places and all. But the thing is, like, all the weights are kind of distributed according to the amount of data that you have, and you are not kind of like when you are actually fine tuning the weights basically for those parameters, you are actually kind of empowering those things, right? Because you are actually passing that data with your location information, those variety for your regional and location context, right? So the model, like, you're not overfitting it, but you're still like making sure that like it's not forgetting, it's not catastrophic forgetting, like it still maintain the knowledge, but understand that like for Kerala this is 3 or 4 thing which has been suggested by the university kind of thing. So you can not like you can try to kind of control it. You can have like a more training and better model can actually do it, and probably it's not going to be like the completely kind of avoidable. So that's why we have like the post inference technique like RAG and all other things like adding knowledge graph and all to actually make sure that the answer actually still like focus on what you're trying to do. So right now at this stage, the model that we are seeing probably not completely, even after like fine tuning or even do use CPT, you can do it, because there will be always case of hallucination in terms of, because the prompt that you're asking is also very important, right? Basically, like someone can provide additional context inside the prompt or the data. Someone can just come out like a farmer doesn't understand. Farmer asks question in terms of the way they are asking, while the data and the training matter probably hasn't been done. So that's why when we actually train, we try to also make sure the question that are coming, like being used for the training are actually kind of coming from the farmer's perspective, like how incomplete or like additional context they provide, instead of like a coder or like someone like a agronomist kind of building it, right? So different things that we are trying out. It's like we're a small startup, and we are like trying, like we even kind of trained recently a thinking like reasoning model from the data that we have to make sure like it thinks like an agronomist and all. But I think still like we are very early in terms of like the biases and all. Later on, with a more like like compute time, like inference and all, we will be able to actually go to the stage where we can reduce the biases. But uh, you are talking about like a smaller startup fine tuning smaller models. Maybe in that case, it's like there will be a gap. And if we, let's say, we get a capability to fine tune like a DeepSeek or like Llama Maverick or something like that, with the data that we have, and we also have improved our data quality, maybe then we can reduce the biases much more. But it's like in game of data, how much compute you have, what is the size of the model. It's like a pretty broad question.
Thank you so much, Aditya and Prateek, for sharing so generously during this conversation. The story that I found most inspiring was the hosting of a specialized agriculture model on the phone of somebody that could not afford connectivity. This is the person that I think about quite often. Just 4 hours from Bangalore, if you look at electricity availability or how hard life is for people in those villages, I can see how profound this technology is going to be when it comes to changing their lives. So similarly, if I could start with you, Aditya, what is the biggest takeaway for all of us for the year 2025?
I think, again, it's been 2023, 2024, and 2025 as well has been the year of open source LLMs. And from an upcoming researcher's point of view, I think leveraging that, going with the flow, seeing what's new coming. Like research, most of it is open source right now. Leveraging that, trying to do something foundational. At the same time, some tweaks in the current ecosystem also do go a long way. You don't exactly have to train foundation models, but you can build very specific use case based models that solve a really particular niche of things, and that can be more impactful in the long term as well. So I think my takeaway would be just going on the open source ecosystem, try to leverage it, and build as much as possible, and try to give back as well.
Thanks, Aditya. Giving back, that's a nice way to end that comment. Prateek, can we now hear from you? What should be the one thing that our viewers take away from this conversation for the year 2025?
Yeah, so from our like personal experience, like building KissanAI, I would say like the open source AI is not just like a choice of selecting LLM in your software stack. It's like more about like, getting the level playing field for company startups, and also like ecosystem building strategy for like whole nation like India. And with the push that we are seeing from India AI mission, Meta's policies, and like, open sourcing more model with the permissive licenses, I can see that like, 2025 next year, like many Indian startups are like popping up for like obscure domains which are like not very popular and like fancy like the coding and all, but like very specific problem to India. People are like figuring out those thing, building models and like companies around it. And I would like be excited to see like those kind of development happening for the 2025, and like more folks in India, developers kind of getting onboarded on the like the generative AI train that we are like all already riding.
That's it from us, folks. Aditya with his takeaways for the individual, and Prateek with his takeaways for the nation state. Thanks so much for being with us.